how you said you've been the bad guy in some people's stories and the hero in the other. If you've been with somebody long enough,
You're going to play all those
you're
roles.
going to play all of the roles. And I have that part of me that's like, I'm not the problem. You want to see a problem? I'm going to show you a problem.
When we say can't it be both, meaning can't both people be right at the same time? Can't both people be wrong at the same time?
What do I need to feel like I have some say in my life? What do I need to feel like I have some control in my life? What do I need to liberate myself? I am not responsible for the things that happen in your life. I'm not responsible for the decisions and the actions and the behaviors that you make.
There were nights we would fight, no end in sight.
We really are excited about sharing this concept with you, this idea, this phrase that it actually stems from therapy. So I had a therapist a few years ago, and he would say this thing to me all the time. And it was one of those things that just pissed me off every single time he said it. It took me like, I don't know, a year of probably sitting with this idea before it actually started to like change and help. Up until that point, it just pissed me off. So like that's one thing, is it's probably going to upset you in some way. It's probably going to trigger you in some way because it's uncomfortable.
Yeah. I didn't really like it either. I wasn't a fan. And I especially wasn't a fan when you were bringing it to me consistently.
Right.
And the way I was like, you know what? Say it again.
Say it again. Let me hear that one more time.
So,
What
yeah,
was that?
It was
What
really
that?
hard to implement. It was hard to lean into and allow it to be something healing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It took a long time. And so we're going to share the phrase with you. It is simple, right?
Are we going to do it right now?
Yeah. The whole idea.
Should we wait?
Let's prolong it a little bit more. But it's a simple phrase. It's just, can't it be both? That's it. Can't it be both? And so we're going to explore that on this episode and talk about why it's so important, not just to us, but how impactful it's been for us. And I'll start off with talking about the therapy that I was going through. So, oh, fuck, now I have to think about that. The whole thing with therapy was I was resistant to it for my whole life. I had some therapy in my early 20s that was really, really helpful. And then this guy came around. I guess we don't have to get into all the nuance of this.
Sure we
therapy.
do. What else you got to do right now? I'm here for the ride. Let's talk about it.
It was only a few years ago, right? Mm-hmm. Let's see, it's 2024. So it was 2020, 2021, where you and I were in the middle of navigating 2020, right? We were also trying to heal a bunch of different things that happened at the beginning of our relationship that were really challenging and difficult. And then I had my whole lifetime of trauma that was haunting me. And, you know, it's like I could never shake any of these things. So we found amazing therapists who actually worked in conjunction with each other, kind of like a team. And we had some really good sessions together and then also individual sessions. And what would happen was I would always come up to these points in processing where it would be like uncomfortable things that I didn't like, obviously. But they were things that, I mean, some examples were like you and I would disagree about something and then I would take it to therapy and talk about it. And my therapist, I almost said his name, Craig's therapist, call him Craig's therapist, would, you know, he's like, well, can it be both? Or like, maybe, you know, both of you could be right. Can't it be? And I'm just like, Joe, guy, Craig's therapist. I used to get so frustrated because I hate the idea that it's correct, right? Mm-hmm. Like the reality is two things can be correct at the same time. The reality is that you can be right and I can be right at the same time. So that's the whole concept, is you have to be able to hold two polar opposites in your space, in your mind at the same time, and both of them can be right.
Yeah.
And it was so challenging.
I feel like I'm going to say especially challenging for us, but I don't feel that we are unique in this space of where it was especially challenging because I had issues and trauma around being invalidated. My feelings, my thoughts, my experiences being invalidated. And you had it around like the same in a sense of being invalidated. So you had to be right. And the other person was not right. And I was very much trying to go through and heal through the fact that I was always making myself wrong And so the flip side of that was no, I'm right now. The healing, the pendulum swing it didn't go right to balance. I had to stop invalidating myself and allow myself to be right. So when I'm like, no, I'm right. And now here comes this balance of I'm right and I'm doing the I'm right. And we had to find that middle ground. It was really, really hard because healing to where I was allowing myself to be right was healing through trauma, was a healing step. So that felt like, both of us and that felt like I was sliding back. It felt like I was violating my boundaries and invalidating myself again by not allowing my truth to come out and be loud. So you're like, can it be both? I'm not this time. Nope.
No,
Nope.
I'm right.
I'm right. And so it was
You're wrong
really,
and I'm right.
really hard.
Yeah.
And it just like, it so mirrored you invalidating me and telling me that you were also right. That's not what was happening, but that's what it mirrored. That's the reaction. That's the trigger that I had. That's what it brought up. So I hated this when you brought it. I hated it and it scared me so bad.
What was scary about it, you think?
I thought that it meant that my boundaries, right? The trauma, I thought it meant that you would say that my boundaries didn't matter because you were right. So it didn't matter if I had boundaries, you could violate them at any point because you were right. And so it didn't really matter what I thought or felt. Like that's how I interpreted my child mind, that inner child that needed that healing was like, this is the only way that this comes out. And it was really, really hard and scary because that's how I felt. Did you I guess you can kind of see that because you didn't like the thought that I might be right. Yeah, I wonder if it scared your inner child too.
Well, it's funny that you bring up inner child. I mean, it's not funny. You brought up inner child stuff. That's why this was so hard, I think, because when we're kids, our parents represent God in a sense, even though that's a stretch, right? But it's like they represent this being that is all-knowing. And so no matter what your parents tell you or say or the choices or their actions, that becomes quote-unquote right. So that's your basis in the beginning. At least it was for me. I know that everybody has a different story and a different path and everything like that. But by and large, the people that raised us really formulate the program that we have based off of right and wrong and specifically like who's right and who's wrong. And a lot of times your parents are right, and as a child, you're wrong. And so one of the things that I had to learn early on, and say had to, it's not like I had conscious awareness as a kid, but one of the things that I learned early on was how to, there was a thing in my family growing up where you had to be right in order to, I guess, survive. But we didn't have contextual understanding. I didn't understand that as a kid, right? But it's that's just how it was. I had two older brothers, and you were always fighting with each other and arguing with each other and trying to one-up each other. And so no matter what they said, you looked for ways to either prove them wrong or make them feel like they were wrong, or just flat out call them stupid and then overcorrect them with your thought or your idea. So it's this massive coping mechanism that comes from childhood that I learned to protect myself with from, criticism, from judgment, because that's just the dynamic of what it was like growing up. And then fast forward to our relationship where, like you said, invalidating your experience. I mean, that's all I would do is you would bring something or you would talk about something or you would communicate even just how you're feeling about something and be like, no, that's not correct. That's not how you're feeling. This is in fact how you're feeling.
Right.
And so it took a lot of accountability to be able to just pause and sit with oh, I might be wrong about a lot of things. And that was hard too, because I had so many stories about myself as well as my trauma. And so being able to sit with that whole idea of I'm wrong about stuff, it's really, really scary.
Yeah, it was if I'm understanding right, the things that you were having a hard time looking at, these thoughts that you had about yourself were the safety mechanisms that you would put in place, the things
Totally.
to keep you safe. and the things to help you survive the things that you went through. And so if you were wrong, that meant that you weren't safe.
Yeah.
That would be incredibly scary to look at.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's like I'm talking about it now as an adult. I mean, I was an adult when we learned about this thing too, but there's a part of me that can hear it through that lens of like, really, like it was scary for you to admit that you were wrong or to look at ways that you were wrong. And it was because it is those stories that I had created around, I can see it now through the lens of like how I created these stories around my trauma. And those were the stories that kept me from the trauma, right? From looking at the truth of what that trauma actually is. And so having a story about abuse or, relationships and my role in those relationships. And those were the things that helped me, I guess, just move forward in life or literally survive, because the reality of some of those circumstances, especially as a child, right, were just too difficult to sit with and process. And so it makes sense when you look at it from that lens too, where that's the coping mechanism, right?
Yeah.
That's the survival thing that comes in and says, oh, I know how to protect you. We're going to create this story, and you're also always going to be right about things. Right. And then that way you don't have to face these things that are really hard to look at. And I think a lot of people can probably relate to that.
Probably.
But it sucks when you're an adult and in a relationship and trying to navigate life. And, I think about how that mindset also influenced and shaped so many of like my relationships with friends and coworkers and jobs that I had, right? I hate criticism or judgment from almost every source. It doesn't matter where it comes from. And if somebody starts to, because I think about all the jobs that I had. I had an MO of just like, I'm done with this fucking job. I'm walking out. I'm leaving. I'm quitting on the job right now and walking out because somebody was like, hey, we need to talk about this. No, we don't. You're an idiot. You're wrong. I'm out of here. And a lot of that behavior stems from those early childhood years and those coping mechanisms that I was also shown, right? That's a behavior too that I learned from my parents. And so, yeah, it wasn't very conducive to our relationship.
Can I speak to that just a little bit more of what I witnessed?
No, I'm right. You're wrong.
You are right. And I'm going to speak to how right you are. And also like maybe like I have awareness of something from the outside that maybe I wonder if you've looked at in a way of not like, are you being accountable? Like to give yourself a little more slack and realizing, because you keep saying, and it is very much, you learn this as a child. You learn this, you were shown it by your parents. This is your life growing up with those brothers and how everything was entangled and messy and damaging. And I guess my point that I'm trying to get here is it's so much more. Like that didn't stop when you stopped being a child, and not because you were perpetuating habits, right? And behaviors that you learned as a child. But that's what, like there was a time when it was still a very like tight-knit group between your brothers, or at least one of them, like, and your mom.
Yeah,
and
that
just
family
like,
unit.
And every time we were all together, that's all it was. It happened every time.
Yeah.
That's all it was, is this constant. So it didn't stop when you were a child. Every single time you're around your family, it was like again and again and again and again. And I would get really, really frustrated, trying to keep I knew better then, but it was like, I didn't have a lot of kind feelings towards others because it was so, I'm like, why are they like, and then I couldn't understand, I'm like, you don't let anybody talk to you like this. Why would you let them talk to you like that? And oh my God, I hated it. It was such a toxic environment. And it was so like, that didn't stop when you were a kid. That's how you kept going. And it didn't matter what you did in life. They had something to say. Mm-hmm. And so there's this part of where I want to give you a little bit of really deep compassion for yourself. And it's more than you just learned this as a child. Like that didn't stop for a really long time. And so of course it was really scary to lean out of that because you always had to be on. You always had to have that protection on. You had to like hold yourself together or else be trampled. Like, there's a lot of love there. There's a lot of room for love there.
That's one of the things that, thank you, sweetheart. I really do like genuinely appreciate that. And it's hard to see. I mean, those family dynamics that get embedded into your psyche as a child, they're incredibly difficult to shift out. I mean, that's your subconscious program, right? And that's another thing that we want to talk about when it comes to this little silly phrase and why it might be so triggering, is because it challenges those programs that you've had about yourself, your life, your relationships, all these kind of different dynamics, because you really have to be able to hold those two truths. Because when we say, can't it be both, meaning can't both people be right at the same time? Can't both people be wrong at the same time? Can't you love somebody and hate somebody at the same time? I mean, it's simple too, where it's like, can't it be light, sunshiny here and dark somewhere else on the planet, right? There's always the duality that exists, and being able to sit in that space is really challenging and difficult. And kids don't sit in that. Kids are very much, there's a right way and there's a wrong way. There's, kids have that programmed into them from beginning, because it's kind of survival based, I think.
Yeah.
But then it gets reinforced with all these toxic things as children and in family units and everything like that. And so where was I going? I was going to say something. Oh, understanding each other's relationships when they were children. Understand, like me having an understanding of what your childhood was like, to the extent of, your upbringing and your traumas and your stories that you have about your childhood and about those early familial relationships, that helps me understand where you're coming from. So then it makes sense why you might, because there's times where it's like, can't it be both? Is you sitting with the duality of adult version of Steph understanding something, and inner child, like 4 or 5-year-old Steph or 12-year-old Steph understanding something. And both of those realities are true.
Yes.
Like there's a version of you, or there's a version of me, right, that is still a child who very much sees things in that black and white way, where, no, that's exactly what it is. That's the story that I needed at that moment in my life to survive as a kid. And as an adult, I can be like, yes, that is true. And there's another version, there's another reality. And we don't like to look at those other realities.
Yeah.
Like I have a version of our relationship that I was telling myself for a very, very long time to make myself feel good, in a sense, right? To really avoid looking at the reality of what our relationship was in some regards. And I mean, it wasn't serving either of us. At some point, I had to be able to go like, that's a version of our reality and the story that we had. And then there's this other version, because you had a different version of our relationship.
Yeah.
And I didn't like it.
I know. I would try to bring it to you and you're like, it's not that, it's this. And you were just waiting for me to get there.
Right.
And it was like so hard, because not only was what I was feeling was wrong, it was also like I was wrong in what I was feeling, but I was also like causing harm to it. And if I could just be better, then our relationship would be better. I just had to get all of me better, because I was the problem. And it was so easy for me to ingest that, because that was also my childhood narrative. So that wasn't something that I could go, actually, I feel like maybe it is both. It was like, no, of course I'm the problem. Of course, but it was.
Do you want to talk about that program? Because we talked about the part of my coping mechanism of like, I'm right. And that's how I'm protecting myself from, my family.
Okay.
That's the program that you're wrong.
Okay.
And the other person is right.
Okay. Yeah, we can talk about that. It's super uplifting. So
it is. It's a really, it's going to make, it gives you all those.
No, I can absolutely talk about that. The way I grew up, it was a very abusive relation, very abusive dynamics. It was very like there was a superior and everybody else was beneath. And so this person was always right. and their choices, their everything, and everybody else was wrong. And hey, everybody, we just want to push pause and take a moment to thank you for tuning in to the Steph and Craig Show. We know there are so many podcasts out there right now, and we do not take it lightly that you have chosen to spend your time with us, and we need your help. We have a mission with the podcast. We want to reach over 1 million people on YouTube. So if you haven't yet, go subscribe to us on YouTube. You can search out Steph and Craig, and be sure to click the little bell so you can get notified every time we release a new episode. Lastly, share the podcast with somebody who you think might benefit, because we believe we all do better when we heal together. Now back to the show. At some point, I learned that I was responsible for everything, that I was responsible for any fight. I was responsible for any negative action that came at me. I was responsible for every disturbance. I was responsible for the fights between my parents. And it wasn't just like, there's parts of it where as a kid you understand, you start to like make beliefs, right? But then there's also the part of where they tell you, you know, because of you, you know, this wouldn't happen. Like, we never fight when you're not here. They're never like, you made this. So they literally gave me examples for me to recognize, oh, this is my fault. And you stop believing that maybe it's not your fault. Like, everything is your fault. And so it just kind of builds and builds. And then you start, you know, making more and more mistakes. You start to see it. You start to prove their point. You see everything that's wrong with you. But then that also gives you a sense of control and safety, because the really good thing that you come up with is if you're the problem, then you're the solution. So if I could just be good enough, right? If I could just heal enough. But there's also a flip side of where you're like, I'm the problem. I don't care. You want me to do this? Oh, I don't like you. So I'm going to do all this. And like, how terrible of a rebellious child that I still hear. Well, I guess I don't really anymore because I don't talk to very many people. But when I was still in like communication with most people, I would still hear stories about how terrible of a child I was in, you know, my late 30s, my early 40s. I'm pretty sure you can quit hanging over my teenage years against me, you know? So I had, what I would take with our relationship was, you're right, I'm the problem. I can fix it. And I would try and try and try. But I also would self-sabotage myself because I didn't like those dynamics. And I have that part of me that's like, I'm not the problem. You want to see a problem? I'm going to show you a problem. So it just like wrapped in. And then I found ways to validate that in every relationship. I found ways I would seek out, not consciously, but I would seek out individuals who would also be like, you're the problem. So I could keep that story. I could keep that narrative.
See, that's the part that I find so fascinating is we've talked about this before too, but the beautiful part of our relationship coming together and being able to we fit so beautifully together in so many different ways, including all the really toxic, shitty, unhealthy ways, right? Where you have a program of like, I'm the problem, it's my fault, I'm the thing, and I have a program of like, you're the problem, it's your fault.
How beautifully we melded together.
Yeah. And one of the things
we were in agreement. I was clearly the problem. But in my head.
Right? But that's the thing is like, can't it be both? Yeah. That's the hard part too, I think, with this statement is it really requires you to take ownership. Like, you are the problem sometimes, right?
Very
Your
much.
actions are causing issues in your life. Mm-hmm. I mean, the majority of the time.
It's way easier to not.
It's so much easier to just be like, it's that guy.
And see, and that's what I mentioned at the beginning that I was talking about of why I was so resistant to that, because I was going through this healing process of where I'm like, I'm not playing that role. I am not responsible for the things that happen in your life. I'm not responsible for the decisions and the actions and the behaviors that you make. If I do something to you, I'm responsible for making you feel like shit. You know, there's definitely things I can come up and hit you. And of course, like, I'm responsible for the pain that you feel on that. I won't be one of those toxic, like, that's how you perceive it, bullshit. But I had to really stop taking accountability for other people's actions and behaviors. Like, I'm not the problem here. I had to start to really empower myself and start to feel good about myself and start to see the good things about me. And the fact that, no, actually what you did was really shitty and it hurt me And I'm not going to make that better for you by making me wrong so you don't have to face what you did. And that was such, like, that's profound, right? But again, I didn't know how to do that in a healthy way. It went from like, I had to just not take anything. So when you're like, can it be both? No, it could not. I didn't know how to do that because my whole life had been, it was all me. And I wasn't going to take that, which, doesn't work. Eventually I came around, but for the time being, I just couldn't see how that was anything other than abusive to myself. Does that kind of make sense?
It makes total sense. And it's like, I'm glad you bring it up because I think that's part of the, like when you, if this is upsetting you in some way and you're listening and you're like, this is some bullshit. Because this phrase / statement, this idea of like just the simple 4 words of like, can't it be both, doesn't work super well in a toxic, unhealthy relationship.
Yeah, that's not the time to practice it. Huh?
Yeah, it's one of those things where unless both people are being really accountable, then, I mean, it's one thing if you're, because as always, it's not just your primary relationship where this is applicable. Mm-hmm. This is applicable to all relationships and all dynamics. And hopefully that by the end of this episode, you'll see how this can shape your viewpoint on bigger topics and bigger things, because 2 opposing sides can be right, because however you, I'm trying to get this thought out without getting too lost, because, okay, off the topic of like the relationship dynamics and how this plays out, part of the reason why this works so well and why this statement is so true and so accurate is because, like, for example, and this is like an extremely over exaggerated example, but if you grew up being told that the sky is green and I was told that the sky is blue, then your entire life you're going to have a program that the sky is green. And so you will like adamantly argue the point of like, no, the sky is green and grass is blue. And I'll be like, no, the sky is blue and grass is green. And we could go back and forth all day long and we're both right because it's based off of however we're programmed. It's based off of what we were brought up with. It's based off of what we were taught, what we've learned, our life experiences. So many things go into shaping your perspective on the world around you. And we can all, like, there's versions of people that would argue, well, no, the sky is in fact blue and that person was just raised wrong and taught something wrong, right? That's a perspective, right? Yeah. You're right because that's how you were programmed and raised and what society is, deemed appropriate. But that still doesn't make the other person wrong, right? That's the really hard thing with this statement is you have to not only acknowledge that they are right, and there doesn't always have to be a wrong person. Somebody doesn't always have to be wrong in order for somebody to be right. Yeah,
another way to look at that is like, it's like what's somebody's experience? What is their, like, how did they, like here you're saying they grew up hearing this. Doesn't mean they were wrong, but like that is their experience. That's their frame of reference. That is very much the way that they're coming into this. So it's very much true for them. And it is not your job to go around and tell everybody how they're wrong and you're right. And if you're doing that, cool. You've got something to look at. There's a picture for you to look at. If you're still listening and you do that, then it's really exciting that you're willing to take the time to look at that. That's a hard thing to look at. And if you can have a little bit of compassion towards somebody else's frame of reference and the programmings and see, like, that makes sense. Their whole life that this is what it looked like. This is what blue was described to as them. Of course, that's how they're going to see green or blue, just for this like context. And it doesn't make them wrong because that is what it is for them. And it doesn't make you wrong. So I love that. And that goes through so many other things. And this isn't about where you have to bypass your emotions if you are trying to handle this. A lot of times this gets triggered when there's an abuser in your life, either still present or in the past. And it's a really difficult thing because you start trying to connect to with that and make them right. And your insides are just boiling because you spent the whole time in that experience doing that. I was very, very resistant to that. And one of the things that my therapist said was like, they're responsible for their own healing. they're responsible for having somebody else be supportive to their experiences, what got them to that place. It's not the job of the child. It's not the job of the spouse. It's not the job to be like, okay, things happen to you, so I'm going to accept all of this. No. And another thing that she brought on is like, they gave you the story. You get to do with it as you please. So they gave you the story. You get to talk about it and you get to heal from it. You get to move past. You get to unpack all of the agreements, the programs, the frame of references that they gave you. So if this is like hitting that, triggering, they're responsible for their own healing. There are people out there, there's a therapist for everybody. You might not have access to it, but there are so many people in this world. Like, there's somebody for everybody that can help. It is not your job to be the person to heal the abuser. It is not your job to see their point of view. If there's a point in time where you get there, great. But where this does apply is if you are triggered by that, you're likely replaying those same dynamics out in your relationship. And maybe you have a great partner. Maybe you have an amazing partner that their frame of reference, their point of view actually matters. You don't have to be right. They're not violating you if they're right and you get to be right. There's both. There's so many different ways that one thing can be right. There's multiple truths. There's multiple truths as it goes around. You don't have to have them see it your way, so you have validity, so you have safety, so you have security. And if that is the relationship that you're in, that you're not safe unless one of you is right and one of you always has to be wrong, then that's something to look at. And is it actually the relationship that you're in, or is it the relationship that you're reliving out from your childhood that you're projecting onto your partner or onto your boss or onto your neighbors or your, best friends of this month or however, where is it playing out? Because chances are it's playing out somewhere. If you haven't looked at it, it's because you're living it. It's playing out somewhere.
I completely agree with you. And as you were talking, I was thinking about how important this concept is too when it comes to parenting, because the 4-year-old that's throwing a tantrum, who's having, this complete emotional breakdown over whatever it is, right? They don't want to go to bed. We all know the different things that kids get upset about. And it's like, you can't invalidate that experience for them to some extent because it's right. Like, they're right in their world with what they've experienced up to that point. It feels like the end of the world. It feels like, oh my God, this is a nightmare that this is happening to me right now. And you have to be able to like hold that at the same time of holding like your experience of it as well is right as the parent. And so it's kind of that whole dynamic of being able to do that same thing. Because I always think back, I wish all of our kids are older now, but obviously we reflect back and we know we could have done so many things differently.
So many things.
But at the same time, having this awareness and being able to implement it with all these little inner child parts of us as well. Because there's a 4-year-old Craig somewhere that's throwing a fit and having this big tantrum, and being able to be like, yeah, that's horrible right now, what you're going through. That's really terrible and miserable. And sometimes, the way that we use this phrase now, because it's been a part of our life for so long, we can kind of say it to each other at any given point. There are definitely times when one of us is super highly activated and we don't want to hear it. And sometimes we'll throw it out there. I think sometimes we do it to fuck with each other too, which is kind of funny.
You yell at yourself with this sometimes. You'll be feeling through something going and speaking out loud, and you're like, can it be both? It's probably both. Get mad at yourself when you recognize it. And that's just how you're navigating it. It's actually really beautiful because you're allowing yourself to feel all these things and seeing that and holding that space while you're allowing your moment to actually be felt and to be valid and understanding there's another point of view. It's cool to watch you do it.
Yeah,
actually.
I think a lot about it in regards to relationships with friends and everything like that, where you get so much in your head about what's going on and, do they like me? Do they not like me? Are they upset with me? Did I do something wrong? Or they're thinking this or they're thinking that. And
they definitely hate me now.
They definitely hate me right now. And it's not to say that, well, you're probably right, can't you?
Right? Maybe they do hate you
But
a
there's
little bit
always
right
going to be some truth in both things.
Yeah.
And there's always going to be some not truths. Like that's an important distinction to make, is that nothing is ever 100% fact and nothing is ever 100% wrong.
Yeah.
There's always this really beautiful, nuanced gray area in the middle where life exists, where relationships exist, right? The minute that I think I'm 100% right on something, the universe just twists it and rotates it just enough for me to see, boy, I had that thing way off,
Yeah.
right? And that's funny too, because when we talk about that all the time, where we're healing so much and then something comes back up again that we got to look at once again and learn from once again. And that's what it is the universe is like, well, you think you had that one figured out, and you did.
Yeah, you did for that time frame.
Yeah, you were totally right about that one experience.
And now you have more tools.
And now we're just going to shift it enough for you to see another truth, another truth, another truth, right? And so you just have to continue to be able to peel back those layers. And it sucks.
It does suck. And it's so freeing. You know, it's so freeing because you get to like let things go more and more. And it used to be really scary to let things go. But as you know, like it's going to change again. Like it just takes another layer when you understand. It's never fun in it. You're never like going through the shit and you're like, oh, I'm so glad I'm here. Maybe you are. That's really cool if you're there. I'm not quite there yet. I still have a really hard time when I'm in the thick of it. I'm like, I'm not having fun. I am not having fun. But when you actually go through things and look at it and not shove it down and not decide that people hate you, not decide that you, not have a whole conversation, create a whole narrative about how somebody else is feeling and thinking about you. Like hear it from them, right? When you're and healing through these things, it's like I always feel better. I learn more about myself. I have a little bit more freedom in my chest. I have a little bit more space and grace, and then I can also offer that to other people. I'm less defensive and less judgmental when things come up. And then I get another look, and then it comes again and again and again.
Yeah.
So
and it's the hard part becomes, because it's one thing to look externally, right? But it's the part of looking at your actions. And I've heard this before in a bunch of different ways, whether it's a reel or a meme or another podcast or something like that. But you have played, and I'm not speaking specifically to you, babe, but the individual, you out there, you have been the hero of somebody's story and you have been the villain of somebody's story. We have all taken turns playing different roles for different people across the course of our entire life. You have been the person that somebody is so excited when they walk in the door, and the person that they're like, fuck, that guy's here again. I can't stand that guy, right? You have played that role throughout your life, and you're going to continue to play that role for the rest of your life, because that's the nature of this existence. That's the nature of relationships. And recognizing that, because I don't like being the bad guy. I hate sitting with there's this girl that I went to high school with. I didn't date her. It's not some story about some ex-girlfriend or anything like that, but she was a friend. And then at some point, I don't know what happened. It was very clear to me that she did not like Craig anymore. And then it was just like, I don't know what I did. I did something where she thought that I was just the biggest piece of shit ever. And it was like, it still sticks in my crawl.
interesting.
Where I'm just like, what did I do? I have no idea. I have no idea what I did. And I used to spend so much time trying to figure out what I did so then I could apologize or try to make up for it or whatever. And right here we are, however many years later.
Yeah.
But that's always going to happen, right? You're always going to upset somebody and piss somebody off and hurt somebody's feeling and say the wrong thing. And you're going to be the bad guy in other people's stories just as much as you are the good guy.
Yeah.
And so being able to sit in those spaces and take accountability for there's sometimes where you won't know it, right? You won't have awareness of what you did, or you won't even have awareness that there was some impactful thing in that person's life that you did.
Yeah.
But the relationships that are most important to you, obviously your primary relationship, the relationship that you have with your family, with your friends, these really important relationships, you have to be able to sit in those uncomfortable spots of looking at like, oh, I definitely played a role here. And my actions are those that I have to try to look at and sit with and address and change. And know that you're going to have those moments where like what is it? You have to eat.
Humble pie.
Yeah.
A little bit of crow.
Yeah.
Don't
And
eat
it
crows.
sucks. Don't eat
Yeah,
crows.
right?
It's your PSA for the day.
No, but I love that. When you do that, when you're willing to really hear that and look at yourself and your own actions and give whatever relationship you're referring to, whether, like you said, primary partner or kids or spouse, whoever's relationship, whatever relationship you're working with, you're showing them that they matter. When you're willing to hear their side, when you're willing not just to hear it like, yeah, I heard you. Now let me tell you why you're wrong. Now let me tell you why my feelings are the one that matters. You're like, oh, I see how I would feel that way. I see that. I see how, like, tell me more about, like, what is that like for you? I didn't see that part. Will you speak more to that? And I didn't know. So you're just hearing, they're feeling safe. They're talking to you and they know that when things are hard, you're not like, they have a partner in that. You're not somebody that's looking to make them wrong, not somebody that's looking to punish. It's like, we might not agree, but they're not going to make me an enemy. They're not shutting me out. They're not being cruel to me. Like, I know when you're willing to hear my experiences, I feel safer and I want to hear yours. And I feel like it's the same. When I'm willing to hear your experiences, you're like, you feel safer. And it's like, it allows so much space. We don't have to come to the same thing, but it's like, yeah, that totally makes sense. You were feeling this way. And then I'm like, yeah, it totally makes sense. You were feeling this way. We both had our own experiences in this and it made sense the way the other person felt and the thing that we wanted to bring. So you're showing that partner, that relationship, that friend, that they matter. They matter beyond just how they make you feel. Like, how they feel actually matters to you, period. Just period. How they feel matters. And that's a big deal. Of course you want people in your life to feel that way.
Yeah.
I mean, I think so. I'm pretty sure that's across the board.
I hate the idea that I've been the bad guy in your story.
Yeah.
Yeah. It sucks so bad. Like, it's such an uncomfortable truth to have to sit with.
That's a good point. When you've been with somebody long enough, how you said you've been the bad guy in some people's stories and the hero in the other. If you've been with somebody long enough,
you're going to play all those roles.
You're going to play all of the roles.
Yeah. We just want to push pause and really thank you for tuning into the podcast today. We both have personal experiences where we were massively impacted by things that we've heard on podcasts. So we're big believers in the healing power of a podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, please share it with somebody. That helps the podcast grow and expand, and we have a really big mission. We're on a goal to reach 1 million people with this podcast, and we need your help. So if you wouldn't mind, just take a screenshot, send that to a friend or to a family member, and then take a minute and go ahead and subscribe to the podcast wherever you're listening and leave us a review. Those things will help immensely, and we'd be deeply grateful. Because remember, we believe that we all do better when we heal together. Now let's get back to the show.
Like, sometimes I'm the reason the sun rises, and sometimes I'm the reason, like, there's like
storm clouds.
Everything is wrong in the world.
Yeah.
Like, I've played that role, and I have to, like, understand that too. Like, yeah, I have actually played those roles. I've been really good for you, and I've really been toxic for you. And that sucks, but I can learn and do better. Right?
Yes.
I don't want to keep being toxic. So when I look at how toxic I have been, that means I'm willing to bring awareness to it and not repeat that. Or at least to that level, hopefully, right? We still repeat things, but like, if I'm willing to look at it, then I don't know.
You know, and it's funny too, because I'm sitting here and we're talking about this idea and we're talking about all these different things and this little statement and phrase and everything like that. And we could be completely wrong.
Yeah.
Like, you don't have to agree with anything that we're saying. And there's probably some other podcast out there that counters all of this narrative that we're trying to share with you and this thing that's been really impactful for us. And that's okay. Like, that's a hard thing to kind of sit with and think about, but it's the reality.
Yeah.
You know? So let's get into what they can do.
Okay.
Because we have a couple of things that when we really started implementing this, and like we said, we were both really resistant to it for a long time. I didn't like it when my therapist would bring it up, and then I would hurry up and share it with Stephanie so that she could sit in the uncomfortable truth of it as well. And it took a while for us to really get comfortable with this idea of being able to hold these two polar opposite things in the same space. Oh, that's the other thing I wanted to talk about too, is from like a from a spiritual perspective, from like a healing perspective of this higher consciousness, or however you want to view it, or however you do view it, one of my favorite people, one of my favorite spiritual teachers that I have, I claim him like mine.
Yes.
This guy's only mine.
I do feel like he is yours.
Right.
And
But
you're his.
Ram Dass talks about it from the perspective of like the paradox. And the paradox is when two seemingly opposing things kind of get stuck in the same space. And so there's another thing where when you sit in the way that the dynamic plays out in a relationship, like we've talked about, especially between you and I, you know, sitting in those uncomfortable moments eventually brings us closer together because we can see the other person's side. But sometimes you face these challenges in life where you have a choice or a decision to make. And those really hard moments where you don't know whether you should, you know, should I quit the job or should I stay at the job? Should I end the relationship or should I stay in the relationship? Like, there's these opposing things that you have to be able to sit with in the discomfort of all of it. And the longer that you can kind of sit in that space and sit in the paradoxical moment of these two opposing forces where if I leave the job, then this is going to happen, or if I don't, all of those things that we can kind of, everybody can relate to. The goal, I guess, at least for me, and I think in the reality is just being able to stay in that uncomfortable spot as long as you can and just wait to see what happens. And it's not like, oh, I'm not going to make a decision or I'll just wait and see what the universe does. But it's being able to sit in those uncomfortable spaces long enough for like things to clear. And eventually they do. Like all of these spaces, eventually something will kind of rise to the surface. A decision will become clearer eventually what direction you're supposed to go, the longer you're able to just sit in discomfort. And it's the same thing with this phrase, right? Can't it be both? It's an uncomfortable thing to sit with. But eventually, the longer that you sit with it and the more that you kind of embrace it and embody it, it frees you up to no longer hold on to stories and programs and beliefs and ideas that aren't serving you anymore. And so a couple of things that we came up with.
Can I speak to that for a minute?
Absolutely.
Like that is one that you have been saying for so long. And I could not
What
get
is?
that. That just sit, like the paradox. You have to just sit in it. And I'm like, dude, that doesn't work. Like you tell an avoidant freezing person that just gets stuck and doesn't move just to sit in something. I'm like, okay, cool. Don't have to do shit. Wait for it to go away. Head down in the sand. I could not understand what the hell you were talking about.
Yeah.
It made no sense. I'm like, I would just ruminate between the paradox, between this bad choice or this bad choice and all the fears of what if and what if. It made no sense to me. And I think it was like really, really, really recently before it started to clear that it wasn't that you were going to make this choice or this, which it can come down to this choice or that, stay or go. But when you actually sit in it without ruminating, without obsessing over the contrast, the other possibilities come up. That the tunnel that you're stuck in actually isn't a tunnel, and you start to get like beams of light for other ideas, other paths that maybe like you try this, like you start to implement this behavior or mindset. You do little things differently. There's other options. It's rarely one or the other. And sometimes it is. Sometimes it's exactly that. But even when it comes to that, the path that you thought would happen is where the light comes. And so you still make, should I stay? Should I go? You leave or you stay. But then what happens next is where all of this illumination came. All of these other possibilities that you could not see because you were so stuck in the frozen state. So it made no sense. You're like, just sit in it. I'm like, and do nothing? I'm tired of doing nothing.
Right.
But it was so hard for me.
You use that word tunnel, that's what it is. It's this tunnel visioned spot where you feel stuck. And so it feels like the world is kind of closed in around you. And especially if you're just ruminating, like you're looking at these two things that you're trying to decide about, and it's just garbage and it feels terrible and you're so angry and frustrated and uncomfortable, or dissociated and completely left the scenario, right? Where I'm no longer in that space.
That's my go-to.
Right.
Pew.
And then it's like, cool, I don't care, right? Whatever. But the idea is being able to sit in that uncomfortable space long enough for the tunnel vision to just open up.
Yeah.
For you to kind of raise up and see, oh, wait, turns out these aren't the only two options. Turns out there's a whole other section of awareness over here that I just wasn't really looking at because I was so hyper focused on this thing. And that happens to us all the time. That happened to us when we moved. Whereas like we were trying to decide whether or not we were going to move and where we're going to move. And when we were looking at all the, not the, very rarely were we looking at pros. We were just looking at all these cons of moving. And eventually it was like sitting with that idea. Eventually we see, oh, wait a minute, there's a whole bunch of other, and it's still that case sometimes, right? Where
I'm still trying to find the pros a lot of times.
Yeah.
It was really, really hard, but I'm seeing them like that. Like I said, I just barely finally understood this metaphor that you've been speaking of. And I'm like, that does not click in my brain. So it's finally opening up and I'm seeing other paths. And it also like takes you like another awareness that's kind of hard is when you're stuck between those two, when you're in the paradox, when you're in the tunnel, you're almost like, this might be hard to hear. And I'm saying it from somebody who lives in this place for most of their life. So it's not with judgment, it's with awareness that sometimes is hard. And you're kind of playing the victim card there. And sometimes you very much are. Like there's nothing wrong. Like when you're a victim of things, but you are taking away your power. You are like, well, these are my only two options. These are it. I don't know what to do. I don't have anything to do. I don't have any choices. You are removing your own power. And when you're willing to sit with that and allow to see other things and see little steps, little things that you can do, that is one step that you're taking your power back. And I used to think that unless it was this huge, grand, boisterous, just coming out and like all of the power, it wasn't worth it. It was invalidated. And that was a story that I got as a kid. I either was perfect or I was nothing. And I couldn't really hit that perfect high. Like that didn't really happen. I didn't have a lot of perfect experience. So I maintained a nothing mentality and a powerless mentality and a choiceless mentality. And so sitting in that and allowing some light in and like, oh, I feel powerless here. What do I need to feel like I have some say in my life? What do I need to feel like I have some control in my life? What do I need to liberate myself in this moment? Is it completely blowing up the relationship? I mean, you can do that. We've both done that. Or is it taking a little step for yourself? Is it a little thing that you do, a little stream of light that comes in? So you're really empowering yourself and taking yourself out of the, I have no control. I have no possibilities. I have no options to, there's some options here. There's some choices that I can make. So again, multiple truths. There's multiple options, multiple possibilities.
So some things that we did along the way that really helped us embrace this idea and sit with this in a productive way, not in this like I'm angry that everything is neither right nor wrong and there's this ugly gray in the middle that nobody likes. One of the things that I did early on that really helped me was I just started looking for different viewpoints. So like what that looked like for me was I started following different social media accounts. I started listening to different podcasts. I started to try to expand the things that I was taking in. And it wasn't from the lens of suddenly this is going to become my belief system or I'm going to agree with everything that I was seeing or watching or, following. It was just trying to open up the awareness of what else exists out there. And that helped a lot. Like just getting other viewpoints and listening to other people's ideas. And specifically, the way I wanted to highlight this was, it seems very, very simple, right? I'm just going to hear other opposing views. And that's the thing that's, I think, really important is it's not just hearing other people's thoughts. You have to hear other people's thoughts and ideas about things that you disagree with. You have to hear opposing views. You have to think about what somebody on the other side of the spectrum of what you believes. And why that is so important is because like in closed family units, I think is how they refer to them. There's some terminology in therapy or something like that, but it's like a closed family unit where you don't talk about the family outside of the family, right? You're not really ever acknowledging or talking about what the family's doing or how the family, all those like familial secrets that are kept, and you don't speak ill of the family. In those type of families, which a lot of families are, especially if there's trauma involved, you have like this group think mentality as well. as well, where your thoughts and your programs and everything that you believe and the phrases that you use and those things get embedded into how you see the world and how you think, because that's how you stayed safe in that family. And that's kind of like, you know, a survival thing. I'm getting caught up in my words here because it's the same thing on a bigger spectrum where society as a whole is this big closed family unit that we align ourselves with in order to be part of society. So we all kind of have to agree that here's the things that we're all going to agree upon, that, you know, we're going to have similar ideas about all of these different topics. And then you'll faction those things off into all of these other little groups. And it's one way to look at it, right? Where there's all these little tiny different groups of thought. And over here on this side, I think this way, and all of these other people think this way, so we're right and you're wrong, and vice versa, and so on and so forth. And of course, we can think about it from the perspective of like the political system and the left and the right, and all of these kind of different things that we have in society that we're all really familiar with, that sometimes we don't really see them for what they are. And when you start to actually look at the other side and start to explore other people's ideas and thoughts, not from the perspective of I'm going to prove them wrong, or I need to listen to this idiot to figure out what it's not from that. It's just from the awareness of like, oh, they're right from their viewpoint, from their perspective. And the other thing I wanted to bring up too is one of the things that really helped me with this process too was every time I find myself being critical and judgmental of other people. So in the beginning, when I would start to listen to like other podcasts and follow other social media accounts, or, you know, just expanding my scope of what I was taking in, the first part of it was just me criticizing everything. Like I would get done listening to something and tell you about it and be like, oh, I can't believe they were talking about this. And I was so frustrated by the conversations or the things that I was hearing, or I was doing all of that in my head, right? And anytime I hear something that I don't agree with, I pick it apart in my head. And I had to recognize, and my therapist would oftentimes remind me of this, but when I'm overly critical of the outside world, that's a really clear indication that I'm not feeling safe in my body, that my nervous system is super out of whack, and for whatever reason, I'm feeling activated. So it's even the simplest thing of like, if I'm always overly critical of the outside world, that means that I'm always activated in some way. And when I'm calm and when I'm regulated, it's much easier for me to hear somebody else's point of view, right? And my story comes from, I shared it at the beginning, where it's like, it makes sense why I'm always activated and looking to counter somebody as far as criticism and judgment goes, because, that's how I had to survive as a kid. So it makes sense. And you might relate. You might have a similar story. I think a lot of people do, where that's why we will criticize and judge the outside world, is because that's how we stay safe in that little family unit that we grew up in, or the societal unit of think and belief that, you know, is all on the same page. So that's important. I think that's a really big step, is just start expanding your awareness outside of what you are already looking at or watching. Follow different social media accounts, listen to different podcasts, watch different content, see different viewpoints, talk to different people. You know, there's going to be people that you work with that you find your niche, and you find your friends, and you find those people that you really connect with. That's great. But try to look towards communicating and finding other people and hearing other viewpoints. And is there anything else you want to add to that part, babe?
Yeah, one of the things that for me was recognizing that you likely like your partner. Like, and if you really don't like your partner and you think they're a terrible person, then this is, you know, that's another conversation. But chances are, when you're going to talk about your partner, not just, you know, how you would go, but like you mean like they're a good person. Like when your friends, your siblings, or like if you like the person that you are with, you like that relationship is important to you, not because you're supposed to be in it, not because you're supposed to do that, but you actually care about the other person, then that is a really good frame point to understand that when you are like, I'm right, they're wrong, that they're probably coming from a really good part in themselves too. They're probably coming from the same space that you are in a different way. They probably have space where what they're feeling and thinking makes sense and has just as much like purpose and love as that you would put into it. So when they're telling you their side, like getting really curious about, like when you have a fight and this is their experience and this is yours, getting curious about why that's their experience from a part of, oh yeah, I know that this is actually a good person. I know that Craig is a really loving, incredible person. So he's probably coming at this from a loving perspective. And for him, he probably feels like he's protecting somebody from his point of view. So I want to get curious about what that actually means and where he's coming from and listening to him, not listening for things that fill my narrative, that prove my point, that validate the story that I've created, that only validates my experience, because there's more than just me in that. There's more than just me. There's Craig, there's whoever else is in their space. So with you, whoever else is in your space, like getting really curious, and that helps take your attachment off of your experience of it. It's not invalidating you. Your experience is absolutely just as true. But if you get just as curious about what their experience is, that can open up space. That can open up space. That can open up possibility to where it starts to make sense. Not change your mind. Your mind might change, but it just allows that space for them to be as right. So curiosity, legit curiosity, like at some point they were really fascinating and you really wanted to get to know them. Bring some of that curiosity in and hear their point of view. Hear what their experience is. Hear why they felt that way. Just, that would be mine.
The earlier we talked about how, we met and then we fit together so well because I always think I'm right and you always think you're wrong. So when you come to embracing this concept and idea of like, can't it be both? We really, like, you might fall on one end of those spectrum, right? There might be some other version of whatever your childhood and your programming gave you. But for me, I had to really sit with and acknowledge, like, I'm going to look for ways that I'm wrong. So I had to accept that I'm going to be wrong. And that meant that I had to start looking for, I got him. There was a little bug flying.
Did you get him?
I got him. So I had to look for ways that I was wrong. And I think you had to start looking for ways that you were right.
Right.
And so that was, important too. That was really hard.
It was really hard. Then be willing to be wrong all over again in an accountable and an authentic way.
And I had to be willing to be right.
Self-shaming
for
way.
a long time, I went too far into that end of the spectrum where I wouldn't own, like, wait a minute, I'm actually right in this scenario. I'm actually right based off of my, my experience and what I've gone through. And so
somewhere we cross paths.
Yeah.
We just like, whoop. And then I was always right and you were always wrong.
Yeah. And we had to find the balance. And we still, it's a dance. It's this whole thing of continually trying to navigate this all the time. One thing that also is going to really help. So seek out other things, right? You want to find other forms of media, information, podcasts, whatever it is that you listen to or consume. Look for something else. Look for the other side. The other thing is you really want to start exploring your own individual program. The thing that you have, like, find some of those things inside of you. We've talked about ours a little bit, but you're going to have some programs from your life and from your childhood and from your lived experience and the society that you grew up in. All of those things are going to shape your programs and your beliefs. And so you want to find ones that you feel are like 100% true. Find the ones that you would like throw down about. Find the ones that you're like, until I will die on this hill. Yeah, you're not going to ever get me off of this one. You can take this from my cold dead hand. Like, find those ones that you feel so strongly about and start getting really, really curious about where they come from. Is this one that came from that family unit that you grew up in? Is this one that was shaped and molded because of your trauma or your lived experience? Or sometimes you had really, like, when I was a cop, I had a lot of beliefs that were based off of that programming as a police officer that I had to eventually start to even question some of those and look at, well, that one actually doesn't really fit my life anymore. And I actually think it's really fucked up and wrong. So find those programs, those beliefs that you have, and just start getting really curious about those. And that's stuff that you can do like on your own. That's some inner work processes there of just getting comfortable with sitting with those, and rather than just looking at them through the lens of like, yep, that's what I believe and I'm moving on. That's the way things are. That's the way things have always been. My parents thought that. My family thinks that. The part of the country that I live in, we all think the same way about that thing. Whatever those are for you, get really, really curious about them, because that's going to help you in the space of being curious and looking for these different things that, other sides of the coin are right just as much as you are. And then the last thing, you want to share the last thing?
Celebrate right? You put it right on me. Is that when you do find these moments where you're disagreeing with each other and you're not in a fight, but you realize you have one belief, they have another, and you are able to see two different sides, like that's the moment to celebrate.
Yes.
You're bringing in multiple perspectives, and there's always multiple perspectives.
Yeah. So when you have those moments where you're agreeing to disagree, like celebrate that.
Yeah.
That's such a big deal. I didn't mean to cut you off.
No,
Sorry.
that was great. That was great. I was thinking, I was getting lost in the metaphor I had. What I just saw is like you're building a puzzle, right? And you have these pieces and they have pieces. Like unless you're sitting there over in a corner with all the pieces yourself, who knows? Maybe you might be. I don't think we are. I think we're all bringing our own. But everybody else has a different set, a different puzzle piece, I don't know why I'm fixated on that right now. I'm actually starting to panic. I'm like, it's a stupid metaphor. Get out of it. But so yeah, just like that real celebration, they're bringing a part of them to the conversation. You're bringing a part of you to the conversation. You both get to have your points of view. You don't have to agree, and it isn't war. You haven't made that other person wrong. They haven't made you wrong. Nobody's like, that's just a really big moment to celebrate. And then if you're excited about it, suddenly it's not so scary. You're like, oh, this is really cool. Like we're bringing in more experiences. Did I recap it okay? I feel so silly right now.
Oh, you did so great.
Let's move on. I'm getting nervous. Time to recap.
So hopefully this helped, right? This literally changed so many different parts of our life, so many different aspects of our relationship. It started to really open us up. And if you're a person that already thinks this way and you're already living like life that way, congratulations, you're an adult. And part of why this was so hard for us, I think, is because we had so much trauma and we were so stuck in some of these really wounded places where when you're in a activated state, the majority of the time, when you have PTSD and CPTSD and you have all of these things, the vast majority of the time, your nervous system is activated. And so in those fight or flight responses, like we were talking about earlier with tunnel vision and being frozen or constantly being in this fight or looking for a fight, you're not looking to see what the other person is thinking or what their opinion is. The gazelle isn't curious about, well, maybe the tiger just really had a bad day and we need to hear what the tiger thinks, right? He's getting the hell out of there. And so give yourself some credit, or not some credit, but some love and some patience and some understanding where if you aren't able to really hold this concept, that's no criticism or judgment of where you're at, or if you're really activated by this, it's just the invitation to start looking at why. And maybe it is because you're stuck in some of these really activated states, and that's okay. We were for a very, very long time.
Yeah. And if you're still here listening to this at the end, which we know you are because you're awesome and amazing, like you're already willing to be curious. You're here. You're like running, as we've been talking, you're pulling out scenarios in your own mind and you're thinking about how it relates to your life. And you're looking at areas of where you might have already, like where you can see yourself practicing it. So you're already doing it. You already came on the journey. You already started the journey here with us. And that's really cool.
That's a really big deal.
Really cool.
Yeah, you did a really big thing by tuning in and checking us out and listening.
Right?
And please share it. As always, we have a big mission in life. We want to create better relationships. We want to help you create better relationships. We want to help 1 million people heal across this world. So if you found this impactful, please share it with somebody. Send it to your friends, send it to your siblings, send it to your partner. This is a really big thing that helped us immensely in our relationship and our lives. So we wanted to share it with you, and we hope that you share it as well. And as always, right, we believe in you, we love you, we care about you, and we think that healing is possible, especially when we do it all together. So thank you, everybody, for being here, and we'll see you next week.
Expect the best. Plan for the
We got a
greatest.
wild ride. Wait and see, you and me. We were meant to be.
We want to make something perfectly clear. This podcast is presented for educational and entertainment purposes only. It's not intended to be used as a substitute for professional advice. We're sharing with you our own personal insights and experiences, things that we have found to be helpful and healing on our journey. But we are not licensed therapists. If you need help, it's important to seek out a qualified professional. Remember, we believe we all do better when we heal together. See you soon.